Progress.
All right, no one's on yet, but that's okay.
I don't expect.
My name is what's your name? Ivan. Isaac? I do again. Isaiah? Ivan. I see Russian Czar. Ivan. Ivan. Okay.
Yeah, it was known as Ivan the Terrible.
Exactly. Sure. Absolutely.
All right, now that this takes up the whole space.
You can move it, you can put it down, it doesn't matter, people will hear you, and that's what matters. You can put it down on the chair, they won't see you, but they'll hear you.
All right. Well, no, I'm okay. I'll be
Okay,
fine.
okay.
Just so long as I have room to
Technical consultant?
manipulate all my chazarai here.
Maybe you need a second.
Okay.
step.
Second stender. There is, but they took it out. It's in the back.
I can go get one.
No, it will be all right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get us in just a moment. Okay? All right, if I can have your attention, we're going to get underway. Okay? Yes and no. I'm going to explain why in just a second. Okay? All right, well, let me start. We'll start with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
When I was reviewing what I wanted us to do today, I discovered on that initial source sheet number 2 that there were 2 errors in Rashi. Okay, I admit that it was my fault, and therefore I reprinted those 2 items. Okay, and I have a source sheet supplement. Okay, for us to deal with in terms of that section. So when we get to that, I will share that with everybody. Okay, so right now, okay, we should be looking at what's called Rashi's Biblical Commentary, source sheet number 2. Okay, I do have a couple of extra, but not a lot extra. Okay, there should be a couple there. Okay. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to ask us to look here. Okay. We talked about Rashi's sensitivity to Pshat and Drash a little bit, so I'm going to skip that one and look at the one that is marked on page 4 of 8. The page numbers are in the right-hand column, bottom right corner. It shows you the page numbers. It is marked on this handout, page number 4. Okay, Karen will share with you. Number 4, and I have it marked with a handwritten number 11. Okay, for those who are not here, I did not able to put it on screen share, but if you look, take a Chumash with Rashi, okay, and you go to Vayikra chapter 26, verse 25, okay, you'll be able to find the text, and if you're using a Chumash art scroll, it has Rashi in it, assuming you can read Rashi in Rashi script. So that's where we're picking up today. Okay? My hope is that we will finish looking at Rashi's, at the number of sample Rashi Chumash texts today, and that from there, next week, then we will go on to start talking a little bit about Rashi's Talmud commentary. And as I've indicated, we're not going into that in as much detail, okay? Because it was my feeling that by going into more detail on Rashi's Torah commentary, it would help us see the variety, some of the variety of approaches that Rashi uses, so that when we read Rashi on our own, okay, you'll be a little bit more aware of what he's doing. Okay, so that's why we've spent a little bit more time with specific examples of Rashi's Torah commentary. Okay, and that's why I say I hope we'll finish that today. Okay, so this example we're looking at right now is Vayikra. As I said, it's the middle of the 4th page in this handout, and you'll see, okay, the following. Veheveti alechem cherev nokemet, says the pasuk, nekam brit v'ne'asftem al arechem v'shilachti dever b'tochachem v'netatem biyad oyev. Now the English translation, okay, I will bring a sword. Why is it I will bring? Veheveti, it's vav ha'hipuch. Remember, biblical grammar often has the fact that a vav in front of a verb, while it may have appeared to be in the past tense, it ultimately changes it into the future tense. Okay? So we have the very first verb in the pasuk, in the verse future. I will bring, etc., etc., etc. And then the pasuk continues, Vishilachti. And our translation then has, and I will send. Okay? Which also seems to be future tense. Okay? The problem in this example is that Rashi, if we look at what we want to deal with, okay, in his explanation here, okay, so what does he say? Look under in Rashi's commentary, it's the Gimel, okay, in the Hebrew side, V'shilachti dever b'tochachem. Okay, Rashi seems to be bothered there. Okay, is that really future or not? Okay, and Herzig, who we're pointing this out with, says that is an issue because it seems to be one type of I will bring, which is a active verb, and then the next part seems to be a passive verb. Why the change in language? Okay, Ada's going to challenge me from modern Hebrew, right? Okay, so this is what he's suggesting. He says the shift seems to imply that the second clause is a result of the first clause. Okay, so even if you want to say from active to passive, even if it's going to want to say it's both in the future, okay, what do we see here? Is he's arguing that Rashi goes into an explanation. We're not going to read his whole perush, okay, but that the second phrase, V'shilachti dever b'tochachem, and in Rashi says, why? Al yedei hadever. In other words, the implication is, namely, that what's happening later in the pasuk is based on what was suggested, Rashi's telling us, on the earlier part of the pasuk. So this is an example of Rashi being sensitive to the shift in verbs in terms of passive versus active voice. Let's go on to another example. Okay, let's look at, okay, on the next page. And here I will ask for some assistance to distribute these. Okay. All right. Okay. Let me hold on for one. Okay.
Is this the same as this or?
No, this is going to be a correction.
No, thank you.
Okay. That's why this new one today. Okay. So our pasuk now is going to be from Bamidbar, chapter 6, verse 2. And we have the right pasuk, we just have the wrong Rashi here. Okay? And the new supplement page has the correct Rashi. Okay? All right. So our pasuk says, Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta aleihem, ish o isha ki yafli lindor neder nazir lahazir l'Hashem. Speak to the Israelites, right? And say to them, if anyone, man or woman, explicitly utters a Nazareth's view to set himself apart for the Lord. Okay? Now, if we take the single sheet, okay, supplement 2, all right? What is it that we're looking at? According to Rashi, remember, we always look for that key word, that phrase. Why does he choose that phrase? Ki yafleh, okay? If he clearly utters, okay? Now, what's so problematic? We all understand what the shot of that verse should be, that phrase, right? Okay. So it seems here that all of a sudden we're talking about a vow, right? And what is the person talking about in this vow? Okay, a Nazareth's vow, says the pasuk. Okay, right, whatever goes on. Okay, but in Bamidbar, okay, in this case in Bamidbar, it has nothing to do with a Nazareth. Okay? And so that is the question. Why should Rashi all of a sudden make a connection between uttering a vow as a Nazareth and another whole separate section, separate topic in the Torah also that has some reference to uttering a vow? And so he feels he's got to explain it, says Rashi, right? Ki yafli means if he clearly utters, as if to say, go back and look what I wrote on an earlier place. There's my pshat. Right? So normally we would have said, what? Gemarnu. Enough, Rashi. If you're a Pashtan, if you're concerned with the simple meaning of the text, that should have been sufficient. Why do you have to go on now and give us a whole drash, a whole expounding of what's going on? And so he even asks us the question, Lama nismacha parshat nazir, the parshat sota? What's the connection? Okay, you want to tell me what? That she has to utter something, just like a Nazir has to utter something? No, you don't like that. Okay, all right, I'll try it different then. I'll tell you what. One utters something about a drink that they cannot take because I'm a Nazir. The other utters something, whereas it's also about a drink, but she has to take it. You like that better? You don't like that one either? All right, that's okay. So what does Rashi tell us? Let's see. Okay, why is the section dealing with a Nazareth placed in juxtaposition? What do we call juxtaposition in good rabbinic Hebrew? Smuchin. What? No, smuchin. One next to each other. Okay, smichut parshiot. Well, that's what Rashi is asking. Exactly. So let's see what his answer is, right? If it's pshat, says Herzog, why not do it consistently? And if it's expounding, if it's drash, what do you need it here for, right? So he's going to come up with an answer, but let's see first what Rashi does. To tell you that he who has once seen a sota in her disgrace should abstain from wine because it may lead to adultery. Sota, etc., etc. What is Rashi doing here? He's darshaning. He gave us already his pshat explanation. Now he's going on and he's using a drasha here to clarify a moral, spiritual value. What is that value? It would seem that these topics have nothing to do with one another. They're counterintuitive. And as a result, shouldn't be related one to another. They're antithetical. Says Rashi, no, that's not the case. I want to share with you a message, says Rashi, okay, that one could lead to another. You have the prohibition of not drinking in an inappropriate manner. Why? Because what it could lead to is other inappropriate behavior. Who is he gearing that to? Right? Those who are going to be hearing or reading his perush. Okay, the common people, the average person. Okay, and so here's a good example, says Herzog, of why does Rashi go beyond just his pshat. Okay, so when we've been asking the question, why is it that at times Rashi does utilize drash? We saw in way back when we first saw that Rashi defined what he was doing back in Bereshis chapter 3, that he's going to give the pshat, but I will bring some midrashim that help clarify the pshat. For Rashi, clarifying the pshat means not just explaining the words. It's the concept, it's the value, it's the idea that he wants someone to learn from. Okay? Next we're going to look at right? So that is the example he gives. Let's look next page. Flip it over. Numbers 11:27. Bamidbar Yud Aleph Kav Zayin. Again, my mistake on citing the Rashi. It's a short Rashi on the supplementary sheet, the bottom one. Okay? Vayaratz Hana'ar. Vayaged LeMoshe. Vayomer Eldad Umedad Mitnab'im B'machaneh. A youth. Notice the translation here is a youth. That's not necessarily the case. Vayaratz ha-na'ar. The, hey, hayediyah, the young man, right? So what is Rashi, like again, our source sheet supplement, number 2, Vayaratz ha-na'ar, right? Yesh omrim Gershon ben Moshe haya. Okay, what is Rashi concerned about here? Not only who it was, but textually, what's bothering him? Ha! Hey, hayediyah, the definite article. It must not mean any old kid, right? It must referring to a particular person. Who would have it been? And so Rashi says by defining by the definite article of the young man, it indicates that it must be referring to a figure with whom we should already be familiar. Okay? And therefore Rashi just spells it out for us. Okay? So again, here's what we might consider a grammatical point. But remember, we've already said that very often Rashi has picked on examples of el, min, okay, those prepositions. And he said, don't assume that the preposition is what we would, I'm going to phrase it this way, ordinarily translated in modern Hebrew. Understand that it could have more flexibility. Okay. All right, let's go on. Okay, the next page on the bottom corner, it should read 7/8. All right. Our section is Leviticus 27:29. Okay. Okay. Here's one that I thought was particularly astute on the part of Herzig. Okay. Vayikra Kaf Zayin Kaf Tet. Okay. Kol Cherem Asher Yecharam Min Ha'adam Lo Yipadeh Mot Yumat. Okay. Simple pasuk. No human being who has been proscribed can be ransomed. He shall be put to death. Okay. What does Rashi want to clarify? The phrase Kol Cherem Asher Yecharam. And here we're going to see again. First of all, he's going to give us his pshat. Hayotze leheoreg v'amar echad arko alai lo amar klum. Okay, one who says that their value to donate money to the Beis Hamikdash, that's erkacha, okay, is based on Joe Blow that's going to go get that the government has sentenced to death. Okay, well, what's his life worth? Nothing. So therefore, the person saying, I'm going to donate what's equivalent to his life is basically saying nothing, right? That's the point that Rashi is telling us, right? Shall be released, right? Lo amar klum. But it's the next part that I thought would draw our attention particularly. Okay, what happens? We see that Rashi goes on. This means if a person is going to be executed and someone says, I take upon myself to pay his erech, he said nothing. That's clear. But now, mot yumat. Why the double language? Okay. Lefichach lo yipadeh. Ein lo. All right. Harei holech lamut, says Rashi. Look at that language. Harei holech lamut is going to be put to death. Now, that doesn't seem to be a very significant text on the one hand, right? But if we were to look up, okay, a particular pasuk, namely in Breshit, chapter 25, verse 32, okay, what does it say there? Vayomer Esav, hine anochi holech lamut, v'lama ze li bechora. What is Rashi doing here? Okay. In his commentary, he has taken other language from perhaps a story, an episode in the Torah previously, that he might assume that his readership or his audience would be familiar with, and he's used it and placed it in his explanation. So they will make the association between the Esau statement and giving up his opportunity for inheritance, for value, to this story as well.
That's
not the same. Esau didn't hear the Torah, okay, but that doesn't mean that a man that is lead to this cannot be had a pidyon. This is not the same thing.
That's his question is not the fact that has a pidyon. Rashi's point is the fact that Esav, he says, why should I inherit? Why should I do this? It's not worth for me.
Correct.
Okay?
So what he's saying, really, I mean, this is what I think he's saying, that Esau is saying, naturally, I'm going to die eventually. And maybe that's what it means over here, that he's eventually going to die, not necessarily.
I don't think it's we're all eventually. But that
Okay,
isn't
but
Rashi.
here it
I'm
says-
suggesting that's not why Rashi chose the language. Rashi
Yeah,
chose
right.
the language because there's an association here about death,
Right.
an association about something that it's not worthwhile, it's not financially. Okay, so there is a connection there. And so Rashi here is using biblical language in this case. And I'm suggesting that it's language that his readership, his students would already be familiar with. So they would make that association, okay? And it's not the first time that Rashi, or the only place where Rashi does it. He often does it when in his commentary on Jeremiah, on Yirmiyahu, where he uses language from Devarim. I'm not going to have us look at that now, but I want us to understand so that this use of biblical language, okay, you would only do that if you assume that your readership is going to be familiar with it. They're going to understand it and carry over a certain message, okay? If I say to you 20 years ago, okay, what are you going to think of immediately?
Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, right? It will immediately bring something to you to mind that you know, okay? So the same concept I'm suggesting could be here in Rashi's use of other biblical language, but he's going deeper because he may have taught his students, or he may have written back on that pasuk with Esau, the reason that Esau said it, and they will relate to it. Okay, let's look at just a couple more, and then we'll finish tearing Rashi apart here a little bit. Okay, the next example is Bamidbar 22:18. Right? This is again different kind of example, but I'm going to suggest that once more Rashi wants us to be aware of the fact that there is a connection between one part of the Tanakh and another. Okay, what's the story? Bamidbar 22, Bilam and Balak. Vayan Bilam. Vayomer elav de Balak, excuse me, imi chainli Balak, milo beito kesef v'zahav. If Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, right? Lo uchal la'avor et pi Hashem, Elokai la'asot ketana o gedola. I could not do anything big or small. Okay? Now, what does Rashi focus on? First thing, Milo Beito Kesef Zahav, the house full of silver and gold. Okay? Let's see what Rashi says, and what is the chush? What is his feeling in this situation? Okay? What? That's always what we ask. Okay, notice he says, and remember what's the cue, what's the hint is the key words that Rashi says. What's bothering him about a house full of silver and gold? Okay, what does he say? This tells us that he was avaricious. and covetous of other people's wealth. He said he ought to give me all his silver and gold, for behold, he would otherwise have to hire many armies to fight against them. Even then it is doubtful whether he could conquer or not conquer, but I would certainly conquer. Okay, based on Midrash Tanchuma. Okay, so now it's reasonable to ask, why would Rashi come up, where would he come up with some sort of an idea that, say, describing a house full of silver and gold is a sign of being avaricious, of coveting money? Okay, right? Okay, how many of us know the word, literary term, hyperbola? Okay, what would we usually explain hyperbola?
Exaggeration.
Exaggeration, right? All right, it goes, right? Okay, if somebody gave me such and such, okay, right? So hyperbola here, okay, may be an example of Rashi using another story, okay? What might he use, on what basis suggests, at least Herzig, that Rashi sees a connection with a house full of silver and gold? Okay, he suggests in the first book of Kings, chapter 13, the following, okay? A story with the following psukim, okay? Vayomer ish ha'elokim el hamelech, im titein li et chatzi beitecha, lo avo imach, velo echal lechem, velo ashte mayim b'makom hazeh. Ki chen tziva oti b'devar Hashem, lemur lo tochal lechem, velo tishte mayim, velo tashuv b'derech asher halachta. Okay? So what do we have here? We have the response of a prophet telling a king, I'm not going to come to you to be with you, even if you were to offer me what? Everything, all your property, all of this. So Rashi here again is connecting this story of Bilam, okay, with the story there in Malachim, with the story in Kings, okay, with the story of Yerovam, okay, and the altar and the response, okay, by making that connection. You have a prophet refusing, okay, as opposed to, and again, you have Bilam initially supposedly refusing. What? Okay. Okay. Who was that? Okay, it was. All right. I'm just looking. Right, it was with Yerovam. It doesn't specifically say. Okay, it's Melachim Aleph. Okay, well, it's got Yerovam here. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's look at one more. So again, this loose use of hyperbola connecting with another part, another of the text. Okay, one last example. Okay, on the page 8 of 8, marked number in pen 60. Last page of the second source sheet number 2 series. Okay, Numbers 35:2. Bamidbar Lamed Hey Bet. Okay. Okay. Right. Okay. Savet b'nei Yisrael, v'natnu leLeviim minachalat achuzatam, arim lashevet, umigrash la'arim, svivotehem titnu leLeviim. Instruct the Israelite people to assign out of the holdings a portion to them, towns to the Levites to dwell in. You shall also assign to the Levites pasture lands around their towns. Okay? We know the Levites didn't get a plot of land, so to speak. They got towns scattered throughout, right? The Levitical towns. So what's the word that bothers Rashi? Migrash. What does this have to do, right?
I guess Nachalat Achuzata, because they really didn't have an Achuzah.
Okay, could be, but what does Rashi tell us? Migrash, an open land. Okay, notice our translation called it pasture land, which we would normally think of as, the cows, the sheep, the goats, the lambs, roaming around there. No. Rashi wants to convey a different message, one that again is based on the Gemara, on the Midrash. What does he explain Midrash here? Open land, an area consisting of an open space round about the city outside it, serving to beautify the city. It was not permitted to build houses there, nor to plant vineyards, nor to sow a plantation. Okay? Rashi's explanation here goes beyond just pshat and wants to express to us a rabbinic idea that there needs to be space in front of this land, okay, based on a Gemara here in Arachim, elsewhere also in Baba Batra, okay, and that the open space was for beautification. And only afterwards, says the Gemara, that after you had the open space around these cities, then you had grazing land, planting land, forests, etc., etc., etc. Okay? Which is important for us when we think rabbinically of what was Techum Shabbat, what was the area, what? Well, more than that. Okay, 2,000 amos, I think what you're referring to, right? Is that you had a place that you could go outside the city on Shabbos and walk around.
Parkland.
What? Parklands, right? Something like that. Okay, so all I've wanted to do, as I say so far, is to give us a series of examples. Okay, and as I said, Herzig's book, he must have, I would say, I gave you 15, 16, all right? He only gives us, in his book here, 88 different examples of tech, okay? And remember, we've said that in methodology, and we said others suggested even more so, many more methods and many more techniques, okay? So if you'd like, you're welcome to put that aside, or if you don't, we'll put it in the for Geniza, okay? All right. Let us put Rashi and his Chumash commentary aside for a moment. I'm not going to go right now into discussing his commentary on Navi or on Ktuvim. Okay? Maybe we'll come back to that, we'll see. All right? Or at least make reference to it. I want to start today, at least for a few minutes that we have left, talking a little bit about his commentary on the Gemara. Okay? Now, we've suggested that, and this was based on what Avigail Rock, Alaha Shalom, suggested, Ezra Shereshevsky in his book suggests it as well, okay, and some others, that the commentary for the Chumash in particular was geared for a different audience than the commentary on the Gemara. Okay? And if we're going to accept that premise, okay, so we would again begin by asking, For whom then was the commentary on the Gemara geared? Who would you think?
Students,
Students. Which students?
yeshiva students.
Right? Could be students in Rashi's yeshiva, right? Okay. Who else could it be?
Other yeshivas.
Yeah, but if they were, let's say, back in a yeshiva, let's say, for example, in Worms or in Mainz, back in Germany, wouldn't they tend to follow the explanations of their Rabbeim as opposed to Rashi?
Logical.
All right? Okay. So some want to suggest, okay, that Rashi's commentary on the Gemara was also not only geared for those students in his local academy per se, but those who might make the effort to learn on their own, okay? Who would be able to access texts of the Gemara, okay, and try to study it on an individual basis, who didn't have access to, okay? Or say you had chavrutas back then, just as we have today, a father and a son, or maybe 2 or 3 people learning together, sharing the manuscript, okay?
Did you also have communication between different centers of learning?
The question is, yeah, let's assume there was, okay? They didn't have email, right? Okay?
But had letters.
Maybe they had letters, okay? But maybe they also had certain Masorah, and the Masorah there in one community may have been different than a Masorah, an explanation in another community. Okay? Why do I say that? We saw that Rashi basically attended, remember, 2 different yeshivas during the roughly 10 years that he lived, 10, 12, whatever years, that he lived in Germany, right? Okay. Both of his Rabbeim, we talked about when we dealt with the life of Rashi, had been students, right, of an earlier Rebbe, okay? So one would have thought, perhaps, that his teachers would have been giving the Masorah of their Rebbe, right? And so he would be getting, so to speak, the same Torah from each of them. If that were the case, why then did he leave one yeshiva and go to another yeshiva? Okay, was it the fact, as some suggested, that in Mainz there was a hierarchy of wealthy families and they were more apt to be raised to Rosh Yeshiva level, and that was not the case in Worms? Or maybe it was the style, okay, of the Rebbe, okay, in one community or another. Maybe one was warmer, had a different relationship with his Talmidim than the other. Okay? There is some that want to argue that that is particularly one of the things that Rashi picked up on, and that therefore the students of his yeshiva, okay, in Troy, okay, were particularly close to him, okay, and had a more, aside from his own, say, grandsons who learned with him. Okay? Right. So what happens, all right, is that maybe have been some communication, but there was a, if I can give you a quick comparison, all right? In Harvard and Yale, I assume they may teach or even use some of the same textbooks for certain courses, okay? But the style may be different, okay? A good example, and then I'll come right back to the text, is when I lived in St. Louis and was the Rav of a congregation there, we had members in the shul who were on the faculty, okay, of George Washington University, okay, and University of Missouri, okay? So I once asked somebody who was in the law faculty, is there any difference between how they teach law at one school versus how they teach law in the other school? And they told me absolutely, okay? In University of Missouri, when they taught you law, they focused primarily on the laws of the state of Missouri, okay? So that when you would go into court, you would be familiar with all of the ins and outs and everything like that. On the other hand, okay, when you were at, Wash U, so to speak, as it was sometimes called, okay, there they taught law on a much more theoretical basis, okay? And as a result, when you finished law school, who do you think passed the Missouri bar on their first try? And who do you think it took 2 or 3 tries before they passed the bar exam? Okay? So I'm using that as an example, okay, that we can relate to the fact that a yeshiva may be teaching the same, or multiple yeshivas may be teaching, but the Masorah that the Rav is going to convey is going to be slightly different. The relationship he'll have with his Talmidim is going to be someplace different, okay? And so I'm suggesting that if that was true, okay, in the time of Rashi, and we know it was certainly true much later in Eastern Europe, okay, that there was a different tenor of, say, if you went to Slobodka, or you went to Volozhin, or you went to other places, okay, things like that, okay? Now, let's just come back to, for a few more minutes, and then we'll finish up. There's an interesting quotation from a book called Seidah Laderech. Okay? The book was written by Rabbi Menachem ben Zera, okay, who lived about 2 generations after Rashi. And in his introduction, okay, he says, without Rashi, the Talmud would have been forgotten in Israel.
Wow.
That's a pretty strong statement. Okay. Now, why would he have made such a strong position in that, right? Is it simply because Rashi's commentary made it more accessible? That could have been part of it. More accessible to students, to the average lay person, okay? Is it because perhaps through Rashi's emphasis on the Babylonian Talmud, okay, following in the tradition of the East European, the Ashkenazic minds and worms and things like that, following, as we said, on the fact that where did many of those individuals come from? They came from a heritage that was based on the Gaonim, and the Gaonim's emphasis on the Babylonian Talmud. Okay? So perhaps he's also intimating to us that were it not for all of that, the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, would not have been the, what I'll call for the moment, the foundation text for most of Halakha and most of Jewish practice and things like that. Now, the only proof I can suggest to you is the fact that a generation or 2 later, when the Rosh has to flee Germany and come to Spain, okay, what does he find? Very little study of the Talmud. Their study was based on Alfazi. Okay, Alfazi was the, what? If you want to call it the short version, okay? I don't want to call it Talmud for dummies. I don't want to use that term, okay? But basically, when probably we were all familiar with when we were in college or high school, there used to be these yellow books. What? Cliff Notes. Okay? You could skim it and that would tell you the whole story. You wouldn't have to read the book. Okay? Alfazi, in a sense, was the Cliff Notes for the Talmud. Okay? And so it could be that that is also what we see. So the point is that Rashi, however, and with this we'll finish up, gives us a running commentary, okay, of the Talmud. Yes, it's in shorthand, so to speak. But what it does is it allows the student to begin to feel they are part of the conversation. They are involved, okay? And we'll talk about that more next time. All right? So everybody stay well and take care. That's another good example. That's another good example. Yes, but remember when Rambam's psak was sometimes based on the Yerushalmi and not just on the Bavli. So that could have something to do too. But good point. Nice to see you. How you doing? Sure, I remember you. Okay.
Thank you, Ken.
Sure thing. Now if I can figure out how.